Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, another Sol production. Sol presents another BBC Radio classic, Any Questions? Tonight, there will be 4 panelists who will answer your questions, and the panelists are, in New Zealand, Jill Hadfield, Charlie Hadfield. You might remember them from their wonderful work that they've written individually and together. And here in the UK, another married couple, Dee Dee Wilson, a teacher trainer of long standing, and me, Ken Wilson, who has been on this program several times before. And your chair is Mark Andrews in Budapest, Hungary. So take over, Mark.
Welcome to another legendary BBC radio program, which has been broadcast since 1948, the year that the National Health Service was founded. It was first broadcast on the West of England Home Service, which then moved in 1950 to the BBC Light programme. And then 20 years later, it was on BBC Radio 4. Some of the famous presenters have been David Jacobs from 67 to 84, who also presented Jukebox Jury on television. And then there was John Simpson, who many prime ministers woke up to on the Today programme between 1984 and 1987. And then from 1987 to 2019, from the famous Dimbleby dynasty, the father, Richard Dimbleby, a legendary British broadcaster, and his children, Jonathan and David, were on television. David would presented Question Time on the BBC, and Jonathan did the radio version up until 2019. It's now presented by Chris Mason, who is also on BBC Radio 5 Live. And our 4 panelists, who are going to now introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves. And we're going to start off with Jill in Auckland, New Zealand, 12,000 miles away from Ken and Dee Dee in London, who are having their dinner at the moment. We're having our breakfast in London and Budapest. So over to you, Jill.
Hello, everybody, and I'm delighted to be on the programme tonight. I'm very honoured to be invited. I've been very fortunate to have travelled a lot with the LT, living in France, Germany, China, Tibet, Madagascar, and now New Zealand. So we've had a very rich and fulfilling life with the LT and really enjoyed it. As Ken kindly mentioned, I've written books all my life and have really enjoyed that. I'd just like to say how we met Ken and Dee Dee. We met them first a few years ago when we were both speaking, well, all 4 of us were speaking at a conference in Aveiro in Portugal, the API conference, which really is a very API conference. Everybody was very happy all the time. And, but I feel I've known them for much longer because we used their book Offstage from the English Teaching Theatre many times with students. And Charlie's got a little anecdote about that, which he'll tell you a bit later.
Yes, I'm very happy to be married to Jill Hadfield, the author, and I try to help her sometimes. We've worked all over the place, originally from England, obviously, you can tell from our voices, but we came to New Zealand for 2 years, nearly 20 years ago, and we're still here, which says something about New Zealand. A long time ago now, in 1982, I ran a drama class at a lovely workplace in Torquay in Devon, and I organised the Christmas show. And part of the Christmas show was several sketches and some mimes of it, but several sketches from Ken and Dee Dee's lovely book. And I put a very handsome Swiss man in his late 20s in a sketch with a beautiful younger Japanese girl, and off we went. They were in the same sketch, doing the postman sketch, and they disappeared for Christmas. And we were amazed a couple of months later to get a postcard from Japan from both of them. And then a few weeks later, a letter from both of them in Switzerland asking us to their wedding. Oh, and so we went to the wedding, and to our surprise and delight, we were on the top table because I had acted as their matchmaker. So I'm very happy to say that they are still very happily married and we keep in touch, and they live in Switzerland.
Brilliant.
And over to you, Dee Dee.
Okay, that's a lovely story, really lovely story. And it's triggered something for me as well. I've been involved in English language teacher training and modern language teacher training for many, many years. I worked in a college here in London for many, many years, and was very, very lucky to have been able to have freedom to develop a course. I did a lot of training as a CELTA trainer, and a trainer of modern languages came about by accident. I trained many, many non-native speaker teachers who came to the UK to train and get the CELTA qualification, which was a different name in the past, but couldn't because of their standard of English. And so I set up a course where we had non-native courses at the college, had a lot of freedom, and many of the students came back. And when they came back, they said, I can't teach English here. I'm not allowed to teach English here. But I've tried teaching my own language, and it's really, really difficult. So out of that came out a course. We developed a course where we're using the methodology from CELTA, transferring it into teaching their own language. And it then became a combination course of CELTA and modern language teaching, where they were teaching their own language to customs and immigrations officers, because I was singing in a choir who just happened to whose head just happened to be head of customs and immigration, and he wanted his immigration officers to come and do modern languages. And that led me to a wonderful little story that links to Charlie's. And that is a fantastic one where one of our students actually was a fiddler in the Queen's Guard, and he met one of my Japanese teachers, and she did a profile of him and everything, and he became very central to her developing her lesson plans and things like that. And they're married and they live in Japan. They're both she's a teacher trainer there, etc. Like Jill, it's wonderful circular things. I love these kinds of things, and it's very exciting. My teacher development then showed me so much about how important culture is. And at the end of my career, when I left the college, I started a new one doing teacher development around the world in different places, and spent pretty much 10 years traveling back and forth to China. And having in all sorts of experiences everywhere, and in different places, to South America, to Asia, etc., and all over Europe, particularly into Turkey, and in Croatia. Never mind.
Okay,
it's wonderful. I've been very lucky. Had a wonderful career and loved it. Key last thing I wanted to connect to Jill. Really important is that she produced the most wonderful book, and I don't know if it's still in print, but it should be. It's called Classroom Dynamics, because one of the things I discovered more importantly than anything, when people change from becoming a non-native speaker teacher of English to become a native speaker of their own language, all of a sudden culture comes into it in a way that it never ever did before. And it is a key role, and Classroom Dynamics was essential for pulling all of this together and seeing things in perspective, that no matter what language you're teaching, that the core of it is creating a dynamic in your classroom that works from the heart all the way through, no matter what you do.
Okay, what a great personal statement. I will say something very briefly. I started teaching in 1968 in Spain. In 1969, I went to London. I met Dee Dee. We started singing together, and that put me in a direction of doing music and theatre and things like that in English language teaching. That was more than 50 years ago. We have actually been married for 50 years this year, quite frightening. Okay.
And you've been in harmony ever since.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that was the voice problem, not the, yeah. Okay.
So that is the fantastic panel that we have for you this morning or tonight. We have 7 questions, and let's move on. to our first question of the show from Almina Chashko, who is in Struga on the banks of Lake Ohrid in North Macedonia. And as an introduction to her question, she wrote, like everywhere, my hometown Struga, the multicultural center of my country, is living through the pandemic with lockdowns and curfews, and will continue to do so courageously through thick and thin. And our question is, what is your perspective on the COVID pandemic, and how has it affected the places where you live? So we'll start off in Auckland with Charlie.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. And certainly these questions have really set me thinking, because for the last over a year, we've been here in New Zealand, which I think from the outside world appears to be a paradise. In fact, New Zealand is sometimes called God's own, which is a nice pun. Of course, we're extremely lucky, and I keep reminding my fellow Kiwis how lucky they are. They don't realize. And in world terms, we have a great advantage. We are like a castle with a very wide moat. We're a small island, 2 islands in the middle of a big ocean, and only 5 million people, so quite easy to control things. Nevertheless, we live in a fortress, but we often feel that we're under siege. And if you know your history, you know that being besieged is not pleasant. And so there is a downside. There is no chance of us leaving this fortress for a long, long time. We have family in England we'd dearly love to see, and in the States, we can't. There is a bubble with Australia, our big neighbor, but that bubble keeps being burst, and the lockdown continues in various parts of Australia. So yes, it's all very pleasant and we're lucky to be here, and many community things have been going on for months, but nonetheless, anything could change very quickly. But nonetheless, most people have great trust in our lovely Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, and her government. Foreigners often ask us, can we borrow Jacinda for a year or two? I'm afraid the answer is absolutely a no.
Thank you very much, Charlie. We move on to Dee Dee in London.
Well, I think I have to take it from a completely different perspective. Basically, our government, it's totally the opposite of what's happening in New Zealand. The government was focused on dealing with Brexit when all of this happened, and had no kind of a plan and had to come up with plans. The first lockdown went reasonably well. I'm looking at the things that the questioner had, and I appreciate everything that her country is doing, because it's so wonderful. It has not happened here. And it is basically because here there was no planning, never has been a plan, and there never will be. And that's the real difficulty. Advisors made the first lockdown work, but after that, because there was no plan whatsoever as to how to control the virus or anything, and everything changed from day to day and was last minute, basically what happened was that people just thought, we're just going to ignore all this. So in terms of lockdown, people are allowed to go out and have an hour's exercise and things in lockdown. No, but nobody's checking anything. Everybody's out all the time. Wearing masks is something that is considered to be a personal right rather than something to do with safety. So wearing them in shops has caused huge problems for shopkeepers, because there are people who don't think they have to. And basically what has happened is it's just gone from bad to worse. So that pretty much chaos is reigning now. Nobody's paying any attention to anything. And if you look at any of the pictures in the newspapers, you will see social distancing doesn't exist. And by the second lockdown, it had ceased to exist. So
Cool.
basically, without a plan for how to control it, it's chaos. And so we need test and trace, but we don't have it.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm.
So that's it, really.
Bill?
Oh, yeah, well, as Charlie said, you know, we're pretty fortunate to be here in New Zealand. We have no community cases at the moment and haven't had for quite a long time, but there's always the fear that we'll get some more. And so people are behaving just as normally, you know, for some time we've been going to each other's houses, going to cafes, etc. On a personal level, I find it quite hard to be away from family and friends in England and not know when we're going to get back to see them. But on the positive side, I've found there's been a lot of opportunities with Zoom. We have a massive family Zoom every Saturday morning with over 5 continents and 15 people from 7 countries. And that's been absolutely amazing. So in some ways, it's offered opportunities for contact and communication that we hadn't had before lockdown. Just moving from sort of the personal to worldwide, I would hope that the pandemic in some way would bring people together. And I think in some way that enforced isolation has made people realize how important contact is. So I would hope there'd be sort of more sense of community and maybe a new normal after the pandemic. But I kind of wonder, I think there's as always, there's a kind of conflicting opposite tendency to, I suppose, to selfishness, you know, to grab what resources or what opportunities the pandemic offers for yourself. As we've seen in Britain, actually, with people profiteering from the pandemic and to the tune of 37 billion for track and trace,
whatever it is,
and not producing it. Yeah. So my hope is that it would bring people together.
Well, I won't repeat the things that Dee Dee's already said very eloquently. The things are a disaster in this country. The one good thing has been that once the vaccine was developed here in Oxford, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the Pfizer was developed somewhere in Europe. Was it Germany? But the fact is they became available. Both those vaccines became available very quickly. And the rollout of the vaccine has been a great success. We've got to try and find some good news in all of this. And certainly here in the UK, the rollout of the vaccine has been a great success. I'll just say one thing about our Prime Minister, which is that from the beginning, he didn't think this was very serious. He said, it's just going to be like flu. Let's just have, and this terrible expression, herd immunity. If you haven't, ladies and gentlemen, heard that expression before, look it up. The idea was we just let people get it. And then at the end of it, you know, everybody will be immune or dead. That was the idea. And it was only when somebody pointed out to him that 275,000 people would probably die if that was the policy, that they gave up very reluctantly that policy and went to a policy of lockdown. I won't say any more now. We've all said enough.
And this is in Budapest. This is my immunity certificate, which I received through the post on Tuesday. And I immediately got down to the thermal baths in Budapest. And now this lets me into the cinema, the theatre, restaurants, etc. And it's been quite a success, this, and an incentive for people to actually go and get vaccinated. Now let's move on to the second question now, which we have. This is from Yulia Kelemen, who's in Timișoara in Romania. And she has a very personal connection with this question, with Brexit. Romanians have split and unclear opinions about the reasons leading to Brexit and its consequences for the British people and for themselves. I am also split between the fear that it will be harder to enter this wonderful country, see my friends in the UK, and the hope that I'll still be able to visit my daughter, who is doing her master's degree in London, and last but not least, have my course in Devon after all. And the question here for our panelists is, what do you all think about Brexit? Yeah? And we're starting with Dee Dee.
Right, I'll try to keep it short so I'm not talking too much. But I agree with everything that she has said herself, because I think that those are real fears and real anxieties. And the way all of this happened was pretty awful. The fact of the matter is a referendum was called, and that referendum people were so fed up with hearing about Brexit. The country was already divided, with people not wanting to leave the EU and people who were determined to push it forward, that when the referendum actually happened, only about 33% of the population came out and voted. Unfortunately, of those 33, the majority, because people couldn't be bothered, they were so apathetic. Unfortunately, out of that, because of rather what I would actually call corrupt electioneering, with a big red bus that said 350 million pounds would be saved by coming out of the EU and go into our health service. Lots of people voted for Brexit who might not otherwise, who were sitting on the fence. As a result, Brexit came in. And we've had to deal with it ever since. And it's caused massive problems in trying to find ways of making it happen. Under the pandemic, it's just got worse, because lots of things have been happening, kind of using emergency COVID measures and things like that, where nobody has any voice at all, because Boris has prevented all of that happening. He got a full mandate himself for what he is doing by calling an election 3 weeks before Christmas, at a time when families and people are all coming together, and again, chaos. And he got a vast majority for the same kind of reasons, which means that Parliament isn't working very well, and they're making decisions about Brexit that nobody has any control over. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave it to what you feel. I hope we are all behind the scenes trying to get back control of these things. So please be positive and think that we are going to succeed. And I'm going to give you a little heart there, okay? Because that's what I believe.
Thank you for the heart, Dee Dee. Jill?
Yeah, I remember very vividly the day Brexit happened. We'd been talking about it at work. It was, I think, middle of the afternoon. And nobody thought it was going to happen. You know, we were all perfectly confident it wouldn't happen. And between leaving work and the drive home and getting home, I turned on the TV and found the results coming in. And I just remember that sinking feeling, thinking, it is going to happen. It can't happen. It is going to happen. So since then, I've been waking up for several months in this sort of state of depression, wondering why I felt like that. It was a combination of Trump and Brexit, I have to say. The two things were kind of synonymous.
Same year, yes.
I suppose I could summarize my feelings as both angry and sad. I'm angry for the reasons Dee Dee said, that the public were lied to, very blatantly lied to, and they accepted those lies. I'm also angry that the way Brexit happened, it was purely opportunistic on the part of Cameron. He was just doing it to appease his own backbenchers. And I think he never thought it would happen either. So he was very cavalier about it and didn't organise the referendum properly. So I'm just really annoyed that it happened in that way. But more than angry, I'm sad. I'm just so sad that we've lost those ideals of internationalism and cooperation, that we've become somehow more mean-spirited as a country, back to that little Britain mentality. And I find it really heartbreaking that it's not really in our interests to have Brexit at all. And, you know, I'm also quite angry that the press are covering this up and covering up the shocking facts that it's making it harder for business. And lots of businesses are going out of business, I suppose, and having to relocate, ironically, to the European Union. First of all, it's a feeling of sadness. It's not the Britain I wanted it to be.
Ken?
Brexit is and was a disaster. It's a disaster from every point of view. I mean, if people need to talk about economically, it has been a complete disaster. We've lost our major markets. We've lost our major source of labor, of people coming in at every level. And the National Health Service, which Dee and I seem to talk about all the time, is a prime example. People from the European Union are in the National Health Service at every level, from the people who do all the hard work of cleaning and caring, all the way through the administrative staff to people like surgeons and doctors. The problem is, though, for people like us, and I include all of us here in this forum, is that we kind of imagined that nobody in their right minds would want to break off with the European Union, you know, in purely social terms. There's a nice bunch of people living across the water there. And this is the problem, that we kind of urban liberal intellectuals are probably not in the majority. You're absolutely right, Didi. Only 33% bothered to vote. But the reality is, out there in this country that we live in are a whole bunch of people who do not like foreigners. And this is so frightening for us, for people like us who make a living the way we, well, just because of who we are. It's scary and embarrassing to be part of a country where the natural feeling of a lot of people is that foreigners are not a good idea. And this is the disaster. But economically, I mean, that's a social thing, but economically, it's been a disaster. Famously, there's a man who runs a terrible bunch of pubs called Wetherspoons. He's an absolutely awful man. And he's now said, oh, can we actually make it a bit easier for European Union people to, I have nobody working in my pub now. So he voted and he campaigned for Brexit. And now he's saying, can we just let some more people in to work in my pub?
As you can see, our panelists have very strong feelings about this. Charlie, do you have a similar feeling about this?
Well, I'm afraid my temperature has risen and my blood is boiling all over again, thanks to what you've said, and you've expressed everything most clearly for me. I just want to add two things, or three things. I'm an internationalist. I have been from the day I was born, I think, because my father, having been through the war and for various reasons, he was a staunch internationalist. And I remember when I was a child, maybe in the late 50s, certainly 1960, he was one of the first people to have a European flag, then with 6 gold stars on the back of his car. And he encouraged me to study languages and to go abroad. He actually said to me once, you don't have to stay here, chum. Go to France if you want, which I did, and I married Jill. Our European friends are completely baffled and disappointed. They wanted us to stay. They learned a lot from British values, what they were. And it just proves how easy it is to destroy something so quickly when for the past 70 plus years, we've been working quietly, not agreeing all the time, of course not, but talking. And now suddenly it's all undone. Just to put an antipodean perspective on it, people of my age, Kiwis, were absolutely aghast when the mother country, Britain, joined the then EEC in 1971. I can't remember.
Can you, Charlie, can you say that again? Yeah, you kind of cut out.
In 1970, when Britain first joined the European community, Kiwis and Australians were really disappointed. They felt betrayed by their mother country, and they felt they'd been sold. And as a result, Australia and New Zealand made great strides in developing markets in Asia, China, Southeast Asia. And that is now, it made them into Pacific nations, which we are. And so when I talk to people of my age about Brexit, they actually don't care at all. They say, well, you made your bed, you can lie in it. And there's a certain amount of, I told you so. And I just think this is so sad after 70, 75 years of progress. But I'll just leave you with an optimistic note. It's not against the rules for us to reapply. And I do think that in so many ways, pendulums swing, and it may be in our children or grandchildren's generation that we will knock on the door and ask to be let back in. So I'm working towards that right now.
And very nice to end on an optimistic note. And those of you watching this, these are all wonderful examples of people talking about Brexit that I hope you might be able to use in your classrooms as interesting listening comprehensions. We're moving on now to our third question. And this is from Anna Maria Jakub in Seke Urvarhe in Transylvania. And she has written, young people in my school seem to think that with Greta Thunberg's involvement, in environmental issues, teenagers can also have a voice and a chance to make a difference in the world. At the same time, some raise the question of how much action has really been taken as a result. Yeah. And if we start off with the question is, what do you all think about Greta and the climate change movement she has started? And we'll kick off with Jill.
Well, obviously, I think she's wonderful and absolutely inspirational. And she reminds me of that phrase, speak truth to power. I think that's something she's done very powerfully. So I think we ignore her message at our peril. But I think your correspondent or your correspondent students are quite right. I think we can all do things on a personal level, but for climate change to be slowed or reversed, it needs national, international, it needs action on an national and international level by world leaders and by big corporations. And that's what's going to make the change. And I guess that's where I'm a bit dubious about whether they actually will. Over to you.
Ken?
Well, first, the good news. We always try and find good news out of this. We have 4 grandchildren. The oldest one is nearly 13. The next 2 are 9, and the fourth one is 6. All 4 of them are clearly environmental warriors, eco warriors at those ages. And it's just delightful to watch. It's absolutely fantastic to watch. The bad news is that, as Jill's already said, we need a massive change of behavior, and that can only come about with a massive change of policy from governments. And I think the most alarming news is, of course, during lockdown, we live under the flight path to Heathrow Airport, when we normally see a plane coming over like every minute during the day, even every 45 seconds. That, of course, has been reduced, decimated genuinely in the real meaning of the word, reduced by a factor of 10. Unfortunately, though, the air pollution has only reduced by about 6 or 7%. So that massive reduction in air travel has resulted in a very, very small reduction in the air pollution over the city. So that, I think, is emblematic of the problems we face. And it's so wonderful to see children who are, I mean, I didn't know anything about the environment, but it wasn't a thing when we were like 9, 10 years old. But our 9, 10, 11-year-old grandchildren talk about the environment as a thing and something that needs to change. And I feel quite confident about that.
And of course, it has been a feature in ELT textbooks for quite a long time. Yeah? But maybe what Greta has been doing might make it more meaningful for teenagers, not only in Eastern Europe, yeah, but all over the world. Charlie?
Well, I just to add, not very much. I'm just totally in awe of her. I think she's a genius. Here in New Zealand, she has inspired quite a lot of young people to, before COVID, there were several Extinction Rebellion, I won't say protests, but actions in centres all around New Zealand. And I've been to talks where young people have really taken things into their own hands, and their teachers too. So I think it's had a massive effect here, which is great. I'm a part-time sailor, and I was awestruck when she sailed in a boat across the Atlantic. I'm so jealous of her having that opportunity. But basically, I don't have a son, I have a daughter. If I had a son, I'd just hope that she might become my daughter-in-law. I think she's such a hope for the future. I mean, she's still a teenager, I think. She is, yeah, she is the future, and governments had better listen.
The future is the younger generation. Dee Dee?
Yeah, I agree completely, because with everything that everybody has said, and I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, because for me, I see it that it is something that has grown enormously globally since she started. If you look at the fact that she, one little girl, went and not somebody who was popular at school or things,
Mm.
because she is on the autistic spectrum,
Mm.
went and sat in front of her parliament with a little placard, which she
Mm.
carries the same one with her everywhere. Everybody thought she was a bit weird, but after a little while, this was a school protest and I'm not going to school on Friday. Everybody started coming out and sitting with her. That grew, and social media took it up. Then things went into a collective consciousness, which ricocheted around the world with a real domino effect with kids everywhere. And when Ken and I were in Turkey doing a conference in Çevre, one of the things, Çevre happens to be a school, not just a teacher training and university part, but it also has a school with primary kids. And the primary kids had come out and done this amazing song, which they recorded, put out, and that went all around the world, everywhere. So what has happened is this domino effect that has been growing massively. And people are unaware of actually how much it has taken hold. David Attenborough works with Greta. Documentaries, Greta has been making documentaries going around the world in ways that people would not expect on husky sleds and things like that, and talking to scientists, and everybody is listening to her. She took on Trump in the UN. Everybody around the world who watched anything like that were amazed, and she wasn't daunted by it. Yes, she did sort of have tears and things, but she had the same message, and she told the adults, you've got to do something. Out of that, in the UK, came Extinction Rebellion, which took the country by storm, and which, in fact, right now, Priti Patel, who is the person in charge of the Home Office, is trying to bring in a police bill which will prevent any kind of demonstrations like that, to stop us raising our voices. But the fact of the matter is, globally, people are raising their voices. The younger generation are raising their voices. They know they're still doing the Friday sit-ins. They're still doing these things so that people recognize them. The awareness is growing and growing. And we've got to see the fact that the planet is going to take over the overall energy of what is happening. And that in itself, with the knowledge that people have gained from one little placard in front of the Swedish Parliament, is going to be enormous. It's going to be enormous. So that's a really, really positive things we all need to hang on to.
Good, yeah.
Mark, could I just say one thing, just going back to your comment about ELT lessons?
Of course, Jill.
Just like, for the teachers that are watching this, I'd just like to make them aware of two free resources. One is a Facebook page called ELT Footprint, which has lots of useful free resources for teachers. And in fact, won the Eltons Award for Teacher Resource Innovation. And the other is, if I've got it.
No, it's always good when you're watching the program to think of how you can relate this to your context, your teaching context.
Absolutely. The other is this book, which was published by the British Council, Integrating Global Issues into the ELT Curriculum. It's a very nice book with lots of contributions by ELT authors.
It's also available online.
It's available, I was going to say, it's available free online. You just have to go to the British Council and type in the title, and you can get a free downloadable PDF.
That's excellent, Jill. Thanks ever so much for showing us that. Yeah, we're almost at the halfway point in our program. We're going on now to our fourth question, and this is from Alma Gero. Alma, as a child, experienced one of the worst sieges in recent times in Sarajevo, also the place where the event that triggered the start of the First World War started on the 28th of June, 1914.
Yeah.
And the background to this question is, Alma wrote, 2020 was marked by the struggle for social justice, which was sparked in part by police brutality in the United States. Culturally, ethnically, and politically diverse people understood the urgency of the matter. long-standing social justice and other problems related to human rights and equality are once again being addressed. This shows that change truly comes from within, and yet the struggle seems to be never ending. Yeah, Alma is also involved in Holocaust education a lot, and her question is, what is your opinion about the social justice movement around the world? Ken?
Well, it's obvious that people like us are going to be absolutely in favor of any debate about social justice around the world. I absolutely agree with everything that Alma says, and she's quite right to focus on the United States initially, because I think that's where issues like the George Floyd killing become international issues. But the reality is, social justice problems are international, and in certain countries, it is extremely dangerous.
You say that again, Ken? You broke up just, yeah? Can you say that again?
I probably did for you. I didn't for me.
Okay.
On the recording.
Okay.
The problem is social justice issues are international, affect every nation on the planet. As I was only saying, I just wanted to say that all the US tends to be the center of things like this. These are international crises. And the problem for people who engage in debate about social justice is extremely dangerous for them. And I didn't want to particularly take any part of the world, but I was thinking about certain aspects of social justice in Latin America, where, for example, people in many different countries in Latin America want the control of their own area so they can grow their own food. And they're having to fight multinational companies coming in who want to mine for gold where they want to farm for food. And those people who stand up for situations like that are not only extremely brave, much braver than we are talking about social justice. It's easy for us to sit here and say, yes, social justice should be about equality, about access to resources for all of us. But somewhere, and it's not just Latin America, but so many places where people are trying to stand up against global interests, they are in mortal danger and quite often are killed for their beliefs. And I think those are the people that really are the face of social justice, and they need international support in what they're doing. Okay, and I think particularly apart from things like people having the rights to their own land, it's the rights of women and girls in certain societies that are so wrong. They have no rights to their own lives, or what happens in their own lives, their own ability to give birth, their ability to have an education, and it's always controlled by outside forces, by usually the male-dominated areas of their society. So in a nutshell, we would all agree that social justice is a major issue and should constantly be debated. But just to remember that in countries where it's a really serious issue, it's dangerous and just very dangerous for people to be involved.
Charlie?
Yeah. Well, yes, this was the question which I think caused me the most difficulty. I was thinking when I was a teenager, a student, about the number of social justice issues which we were concerned about. I won't list them now, but one in particular, or two in particular, which I think show how much has changed for the good, and makes me hope that things will change for the better, over the next generation or so. And thinking back to what life must have been like in, 1500 in our countries, life is immeasurably better. And there are various social philosophers who are talking about this and saying life has never been better. So I think international communication means that we're much more aware of social injustices and other ills all over the world. But on the other hand, movements are happening and working so much faster. Two examples. One is when I was at university, and Jill too, where we met. I mean, there was this thing called Women's Lib, which is now feminism. And I think you have to measure how far things have progressed. I'm not a woman, so I can't really speak for this. But the other thing is gender issues such as homosexuality. When I was at university, I think that homosexuality was still illegal in Britain. And now our daughter and her friends, they talk perfectly openly with their parents and us about gender issues, trans, lesbian, all those issues which personally I don't understand. But there has been incredible progress. The death of Floyd, which Ken mentioned, I find it incredible how Black Lives Matter has grown in power in just over a year. I think that's a very positive thing. We're all very well aware, and I just feel my generation, or me, myself, have been sort of treading water most of my life, hoping things would change. But I think young people, they're teenagers like Greta, and in the Black Lives Matter and other issues, they're doing something about it. And I just wish I could turn back the clock and be 15 or 16 again and start. But then I wouldn't be married to Jill, so maybe that wouldn't be so good.
It seems that there's a lot of optimism about the younger generation, that people are taking action on a number of issues. Dee Dee?
Yes.
Right. What I find about this, I like this question very, very much, because basically it covers everything. It covers humanity, it covers the planet, it covers health, it covers employment, housing, homelessness, absolutely everything coming together, or life and how we live it. And yes, as you say, Charlie, it has changed enormously since we were younger, and this generation have to deal with so much more because they know so much more, because of social media, because of the speed of everything within cyberspace, etc.
Yes.
But these are also the things that are causing many of the problems. I think one of the key issues, which also goes back to looking at Brexit, but not just Brexit, is to do with trade, corporations, and the total imbalance that has come about through wealth and things to do with the corporations and trade that are running everything. So you look at the rainforests and you look at the indigenous people, you look at Borneo and Indonesia, and the rainforest being cut down for palm oil. So everybody who's eating Doritos, everybody who's eating all your chocolates, including Ferrero Rocher and things like that, cheap biscuits, etc., 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 that comes at a price. And they're called orangutans, and the animals in the habitats and all in all the rainforests. But even worse is the humanity side, where they're using slave workers, people who are not getting paid, people who are indigenous people, to wipe out the people themselves, using them until they can't be used anymore, to create these cheap junk food things that they make vast profit on. And people don't realize it. When you go to buy some Doritos and salsa, you think you're just going to have something really nice. You don't think about how many orangutans you've killed and all the rest of it. So these things are to do with the planet. They're to do with our forests. They are to do with our air. They're to do with everything that we breathe. They're to do with employment and our health. And that's where I'm going to sort of finish here. Because again, we have the trade issue. We have Brexit behind this. We have using the COVID emergency things to be destroying our NHS and to be bringing in behind the scenes things which are creating huge abuses for everybody working within the NHS, many of them who are agency people on 0-hour contracts doing administrative work, who have no support or anything for their own health, and all the people who are working within the NHS who have had to make huge sacrifices, have seen people die, etc., etc., whilst the government is hiving off our money to pay private companies to do things like test and trace, 37 billion pounds of things that don't actually work, and we can't do anything about it. So that's where social justice becomes social major injustice, feeding the rich, keeping their cronies well oiled and well fueled, while abusing people who have no say, can't do anything, and expecting them to carry on quite happily with the offer of a 1% pay rise for people whose salaries have been frozen for at least 5 or 6 years, you know, working behind the scenes, protected by the EU before on their work contract hours, no longer protected because they're on contracts which make them work 12 to 14 hours, or in the case of junior doctors, 24-hour shifts in 5 hospitals, you know, or sometimes is up to 48-hour shifts where they're not allowed to speak up. So that's where we have social injustice.
Yes.
And I won't.
And maybe with some groups that some teachers working with more advanced groups can look at are the health systems in their own countries, yeah, and also
Exactly.
and also in this part of the world, why it is that a lot of people who do train as nurses and doctors do leave and go to Western Europe and North America.
Well, it's now been found that been found that people are suffering from PTSD and are leaving in droves, apart from anything else. And that is a really serious one. But health issues abroad as well in other countries. There is an American, and these are all American corporations that are being brought in to take over our data, NHS data, a company called Palantir, and another company called Centene. Now, Centene is a fraudulent US American insurance company, which actually is embedded in Spain, embedded in other countries without people really knowing it there. And they are harvesting everybody's health data to be used in ways that we don't know. And here in this country, people don't even know it, but they have to opt out from this with their GPs by the 23rd of June this month, but people don't know. And if they don't, their NHS data will be taken by these American corporations.
Jill,
So
you finish
all
up?
around the world, they need to check the same thing and find out where the private side is, because this is all linked to data now. And Palantir is the big data one, and it is a Trumpian data collection thing that used to be part of the CIA. And has a very bad reputation.
Jill?
Yeah, well, I think you've all said everything very well. I suppose my particular concern is that these movements for social justice, like Black Lives Matter, seem to be coinciding with a rise in the authoritarian right in the US, in the UK, and all over Europe and Latin America as well. And I find it, I think Didi mentioned this in one of the previous comments, I find it really alarming that the British government is passing or attempting to pass laws to make it harder to protest. Yeah. And I find that very, very sinister. And I'm sure Trump was on the way to doing it. And well, I guess, thank God, Biden is there. But I find the Republicans in America, the moves to voter suppression, and trying to make sure that Black and working class voters are less represented. I find that very, very alarming. So,
and this is actually the content of our next question, our 5th question, which is from a colleague of mine here in Budapest. And the question is, this is from Frank Prescott. And Frank actually, this is the question. Frank actually wrote to me and he said, I think Biden has been less predictable than a lot of people thought. And he does actually seem to have some ideas about how to make the kind of changes we need to make in order to switch to a viable economic model and have some chance of avoiding complete collapse. And then, like you were just mentioning, Jill, he says he needs to do something about voting rights, though. And the Republicans, or should I say, the crazy white supremacist party, are a huge threat to the very idea of democracy in America. And the question from Frank is...
Oh, I've just put it away. What do you think of the president and
yes,
vice president?
what do you think of the new American president? Charlie.
And vice president, yes.
And vice president. Charlie, can you start off with this for us, please?
Oh, fine. I'll be brief. We have many American relatives, cousins and their offspring, and we talk with them on Zoom quite a lot. And I just sense all over the United States what a sense of relief, what a breath of fresh air, common sense after the nightmare of, what was he called? Well, number 45. Anyway, number 46, Joe Biden. Let's not forget that he is actually older than his predecessor, and he's done so much in the last 100+ days. Quite inspiring, quite unpredictable. I mean, who'd have thought that a man of his age could do so much? And I really have a lot of hope that he's inspired, well, my relatives and friends in the States, but I also think elsewhere in the world, there is this hope that his kind of approach to problems, which is quite reminiscent of Roosevelt, FDR, the New Deal in the 30s, which actually had an effect all over the world, not including here in New Zealand. There is a better way to approach problems of all sorts, you know, voting and Black lives and social and infrastructure, everything. And I think he is on the way to becoming a great president. And let's just remind ourselves that Kamala Harris, who I sense had sort of dropped off the news slightly internationally, she has now been charged with 2 great jobs. And of course, she's a lot younger than Biden, and so she's going to carry that torch on. And I just feel pretty optimistic, and it's not even my own country. I mean, but I know my American friends and colleagues are just so happy to have common sense in charge once again.
Jill?
Yes, it's such a relief not to turn on the news and hear about the now last Trumpian disaster that's just happened. I have enormous respect for Biden. I think he's turned out to be more progressive, actually, than people thought, which has been very interesting. I think he's very sensible, and I think he's quiet and dignified. He's restored dignity to the presidency, is what I would say. And I think it's absolutely great that he's got Kamala Harris as his vice president. And I think perhaps what my secret hope is that he gets a second term and decides to resign and hand over the presidency to her. And we have the first woman and the first Black woman American president.
That'd be wonderful.
And the future with the younger generation.
Yes.
Ken?
I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. There's a wonderful sense of relief. I think we have to think back to the time of the election with that terrible, terrible event just before, when the invasion of the Capitol building, definitely inspired by Trump and instigated by Trump and inflamed by Trump. But I think we also have to remember on election day, Joe Biden got 78 million votes, more votes than any other president has received in being elected, which is great. However, on the same day, 75 million people, more or less, voted for Trump, which is the second highest number of votes ever given to a presidential candidate. So at the time, this is being positive, because at the time, it just felt as if that massive, massive support for Trump, plus this underlying absurd idea that somehow the election had been stolen from him, was going to result in chaos, in inflammatory behavior on Trump supporters, and just civil disaster. And it hasn't happened. It has not happened. The 100 years since what you've already said, Charlie, particularly, he's done astonishing things in his first 100 days. He's done more than you might expect. A 78, he's a 78-year-old man. That's not much older than me. So, hopefully even somebody of 78 has a little bit of energy to do things. But he's had astonishing energy. Just the very last thing, I think if you look back even further to the process of choosing the candidate for the Democrats, the most virulent critic of Joe Biden in the debates was Kamala Harris. She tore him to shreds. And it was rather alarming, because you're looking around thinking, this is a very interesting bunch of candidates, but what we need is some kind of combination of the talents and abilities of all these people. I mean, I can't pronounce his name, Pete Buttigieg. Remember the guy? It's about 14 years old and he's gay. I mean, you thought, is America ready for a 14-year-old gay president? And probably not. But he had such skills, and I thought maybe he'll choose him for his running mate. No, he needs a woman, and he chose Kamala Harris. What a clever idea! Keep your enemies close to you, as
Yes.
Caesar would say.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, I hope none of us are going to be disabused about this, but it's felt like the most wonderful, refreshing time since the election.
Yes.
Edie?
Well done.
Yeah, I linking to that one and to Charlie and FDR. What is amazing about that is that Biden had been a senator from Maryland, just south of the Mason-Dixon line. I went to university in Maryland, and it was the last state in the Union that actually stopped segregation. I went to a university that the town was completely divided, white and black side of town. So
Wow.
that kind of shows you how far he has come in his attitudes and where he's come. And what's amazing about him is that this is the link to FDR, is actually sort of seeing in his career as he's gone on, he's learned so much. He's taken things on board, and what he's brought into it is kind of what FDR has brought in all those years ago. We saw something about him the other day that when he actually became president, FDR, he didn't really know what he was going to do or how he was going to deal everything, and that he kind of sort of was flying by the seat of his pants and was making up things as he went. But the key thing for him, the most important thing for him, was that he was going to stop political division, that you're not socialists and communists, and you're not right-wing extremists. Where we are looking at is coming into the middle. We're coming into where people work together, where there is a meeting in the middle, where everyone is sharing and everyone is having to make concessions, but to be able to work together to make things work. And that was his premise from the start. And I believe that's where Biden is as well. And he's not taking any kind of nonsense of things. He's looking at, for example, to do with trade here. He's taking no nonsense as far as Brexit is concerned, because he's not going to allow Boris, he is Trump, to do anything that is going to cause problems for Northern Ireland and Ireland. And if he does, he's not going to get trade as far as Biden is concerned. Boris hasn't realized that yet somehow. No. So there's a huge amount of hope here, because it is the meeting in the middle. It is the meeting of not left or right, but cross-party in politics, of people working together for a common good, working together to make things work for the planet, for everything. And I think that Biden, this is my own personal feeling, is going to be the one who's actually going to bring those things together through his leadership and what he is doing. He's quiet, he's soft-spoken. People that we know, our friends in the States, said, well, we haven't heard much about what he's doing there, but that's because most of the news there is right-wing. So you've got Fox News and all, CNN and all the rest of it. So what he's doing is not going to be highlighted to any great degree in the United States. But it is happening, and we can see it happening through the things that he has been doing. So I think this is our hope. Again, it's a heart, and I see it as a big heart.
And it was actually no coincidence that when Biden received the nomination, he actually quoted Seamus Heaney, and he is very interested in this Irish connection. Now, I think what we've covered 5 of the major issues, and it was interesting we finished up with Biden because, of course, the United States is the most powerful country in the world. And we've looked at the pandemic, Brexit, the climate catastrophe, the social movements now. And we're going to finish with 2 questions, which are of a more personal nature, which I think are nice. The first one from Milica Vojvodic from Belgrade would like to know from our panelists, what are the most unusual or extreme teaching situations that you have worked in? And Jill, if you could start us off on that one.
Well, I think we've worked in two very unusual teaching situations. One was Tibet and the other was Madagascar. So I'll kick off with Tibet and leave Madagascar for Charlie. Tibet, Charlie and I were the first foreigners to work in Tibet when
Wow.
Tibet was first opened to the public, to foreigners by the Chinese. And we had a project, it was a British Council project at the University of Tibet, which was taking its first intake of Tibetan students. So our second year students were all Chinese, but our first year students were all Tibetan.
Wow.
It was part of an opening up of Tibet under, oh gosh, I've forgotten the name, under the current regime, which was opening up in lots of ways. So we arrived there, and I suppose the way it was extreme was probably the living conditions. So we had a little flat, which was very nice. It had, the kitchen was completely bare, except for a fridge, which was connected for some reason to the light bulb. And there was, to cook on, there was a one-ring stove, which ran for some reason on petrol. And it created large clouds of very thick black smoke. So in order to cook anything, which was usually yak stew, because there wasn't much else to eat, I had to take it outside the flat onto the landing and squat on the landing with this stove and cook whatever I had to cook on it. But I suppose one of the hardest things was the winter. We actually wrote a book about it called A Winter in Tibet. Outside it was -20, and we had no heating in our flat.
Oh God.
Oh my God.
So inside the flat, it was -8. I washed my hair once and it froze. A bit later, that was when we still had running water. A little bit later, the building had been built by Chinese architects who for some reason had placed all the pipes on the north side of the building. The Tibetan houses were actually quite sensible. They had very thick walls made of sort of yak dung, I think, and they were well insulated and they faced south, so they got the sun. But all our pipes froze up, which meant that not only did we have no running water, so we had to go to a kind of tap some way away, but we also, the loo froze up. So we had to go to the public loo, which was a sort of 3-hole affair some way away. I actually used to ride my bike to go to the loo to shorten the length of time I needed to be outside. So yeah, it was so cold that we had to get the students up to do exercise every few minutes in class because it was very cold in class. It was actually very bonding doing the exercises every so often. And in bed, we used to wear ski clothes and hats and mittens and gloves. And when we were miserable because of the cold, I used to get out these briefing notes we'd been given by the British Council. And nobody had ever worked in Tibet before, so they had no idea how to brief people for Tibet. So what they gave us was briefing notes intended for diplomats in Beijing. And I would read Charlie my favourite sentence, which began, a reasonable white wine, suitable for poolside parties, is available from the Friendship Store in Beijing. But champagne, when required, should be ordered by the crate from Hong Kong. I so wanted to order a crate of champagne from Hong Kong and say, we required this. Anyway, I have to say that Tibet was one of the highlights, or probably the highlight of our teaching career. It was a very joyful,
wonderful. What a wonderful story.
Wonderful, wonderful place to work, wonderful people, and I have just the most treasured memories of that whole time there.
Wow, wow. And so all our teachers listening, thinking of the circumstances that they work in, I think that's a sobering story to listen to. Dee
I can't follow that one. Basically, the only way I can is to say that my extreme teaching happened all in China and was extremely unexpected. because I found myself, and it was all to do with culture, majorly to do with culture. I had been taken on first to work doing teacher training for the Foreign Languages Teaching and Research Press, to work with Chinese trainers, teacher trainers, and basically to travel with Chinese teacher trainers all around China. Now, the whole idea of training in China culturally, number one, their classroom culture is one where all students are not allowed to ask questions. They're not allowed to speak in class. They just have to listen. They can ask questions and things outside class afterwards, but that is the culture. Teacher training is down to teachers observing classes, perfect communicative classes, and then being expected to go back and do it in their classrooms where their students are not allowed to speak, their students are not allowed to ask questions, their students aren't allowed to do any of these things. So basically, they have to learn to give permission in that class, find ways of actually creating communicative ways of doing things, and then going back to being Chinese when they go to all their other classes. So this was my task. I was traveling with the Chinese trainers who did their training first. Now, everywhere we went, we traveled all over to the different education districts because a new communicative course book had come out. And this was to be used. It was the first ever one all around the country. And it was the Chinese Education Ministry responsible. So in the morning, they would have Chinese training, which was death by PowerPoint, basically. And what the Chinese teachers do in these huge halls with anything from a minimum of 300 to 1,000, 1,500 teachers, was they would all try to get to the far back so they could put their heads down and go to sleep. And that's what they did. They didn't bargain for me. I had to come in the afternoon and do 3-hour sessions with them. And I had to start off by actually saying, this is your training, but when you do workshops in England, I work and you work. So you're all going to do things and you're going to do things together. And I'm going to keep you awake because I have a microphone and I'm going to run up and down the aisles and I'm going to make sure you get into groups and I'll make sure you get into pairs and we will do activities and I will watch you all and we will do it. That was a real challenge. And the first thing that I had to do was to make sure everywhere we went that I had a handheld mic, that I had all the things that I needed for activities, etc., and that I genuinely was ready to run up and down and get people into groups to do things. That went on for quite a few years with FLTRP, but it also became something I did with the British Council, because out of that, the British Council started doing what they call roadshows, because one of their trainers had worked with me, saw how it worked, and they decided that we were going to do roadshows, doing the same kind of traveling, where we would go from one city to another across China. Somebody would do it in the north of China, and somebody else would do it in the south of China. So you would do a listening one, where you would work with another trainer, and you would do the same workshop. And basically, it would be 3 hours, going from Shanghai to Guangzhou. You know, fly, 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 leap in, fly out, go off you go. But it was the most wonderful, wonderful experience in the whole world, as with Jill, where you find the connection and the enthusiasm and the things that come out of it, where we can do this, because that was my aim all along. You can do it. But you've got to look at your culture. You've got to look at your pronunciation, not just your pronunciation, but you don't have to talk. You don't have to talk about pronunciation with the Chinese. They know that problem. But you have to look at how you create ways, classroom dynamics, how you put all these things together, and do it step by step of the things, the ingredients that come through it. I learned so much, and I think that was the most wonderful thing about it all together, because you learn from the people that you are working with. And I treasure that. I absolutely treasure that.
Yeah.
Really, my extreme.
Charlie, have you got any extremes?
Well, I suppose, as Jill mentioned, Madagascar was a wonderful, very rich place to work, and I've got lots of stories. So this is not actually a classroom teaching experience, but it involved my job. I was part of a project and my main job was to drive a Land Rover around Madagascar full of books, and Jill and I helped set up teacher resource centres in the main towns. So there were 6 main towns, and one of these towns was a very difficult road, and I had an ancient Land Rover which was quite old. The roads were really quite difficult, very tiring. This town it was possible to get there in one day, but it was a very long, tiring day. And one time, the basic rule, because the sun comes up at 6 and goes down at 6, it's tropical, you must not be out on the road at night, partly because the roads are so dangerous, but also because there are bandits who might stop you and steal your teacher's books. So Jill and I were going down this road, and suddenly the Land Rover started making funny noises, and I thought, oh dear, we're not going to get to our destination. But there was another town not far away, so we just managed to get into this town just before sundown and found a little hotel to stay the night. But of course the problem was the Land Rover had packed up, and I think I was very worried about what to do. So the next morning I asked the owner, is there a mechanic who can help me, because I'm no mechanic, and I didn't know what to do. And he said, oh, easy, just go to the good Jesuit father mechanics, and they're down the hill. This was all in French, of course, because Madagascar was French, well, a French colony, ex-French colony. So we coasted down, Jill and me and a colleague, we coasted down to the garage, and we went into the courtyard, and a priest came out, a tall French priest in his robes, and I thought, what's he going to do? Maybe he'll swing some incense and say a prayer and bless the Land Rover, and that will do. But no, of course, he was a very practical guy with oily hands, and he got some of his employees to mend the Land Rover, and within an hour or so, we were off on our way. And this man, I was just suddenly struck by what a wonderful man he was. He was a Jesuit priest. He was well known all over that region for helping schools, for planting trees, for stopping deforestation, developing paddy rice in water instead of chopping down trees and growing hill rice. He was just a wonderful man. And as a result, I just gained huge respect for these Catholic priests and nuns who had decided to go off to Africa or developing countries, basically to do good work. And I think the religious side of it was the least of their concern. I have another story which Jill might say, but I think the thing is they knew that there were problems in the world and they wanted to do good, and being in the priesthood or being a nun was just a means to doing that. And we had a favourite Irish nun who, had she not gone to Madagascar and other African places, I think she would have married a farmer in the middle of Ireland and remained and actually not had much to do. So she escaped. And I think this Jesuit mechanic had too. And I'm full of admiration for those sorts of people.
Brilliant.
And
not actually teaching them.
And actually, apparently, there are more Irish people involved in aid work around the world than from any other country, proportionately, as a result of what Ireland experienced in the middle of the 19th century with the famine. That it's a very important part of the Irish psyche. Yeah? And you'll go anywhere in the world and meet Irish people.
My daughter was on a language course in Spain and met a very nice Irish boy. And she and her friends were saying, so what's the best part of Ireland? And he said, the airport.
Ken, can you finish up this?
Well, I've just been, that's fascinating what you've all been saying. I'll just go back to two very brief things that happened when I was working for a company called the English Teaching Theatre. Some of you, I think most of the people watching this program will be too young to remember the ETT. We closed in about 2002, but we were on the road for 29 years and we went to 56 different countries with the show.
Wow.
I didn't go to 56 myself. I went to about 25, I suppose, as a performer. And I was director of the company thereafter. But two things that come to mind was, I mean, we had to really, we were able to do shows in pretty reduced circumstances or pretty unusual circumstances. And both these memories concern animals having a part to say, or creatures having a part to say in what we were doing. Because we got to Cairo, Egypt, and the embassy said, you know, we're going to have a show at the embassy. I went, ooh. We went to the embassy, but the show was actually on the back steps facing the back garden, and the garden was full of chairs, which is okay. It was very noisy anyway because there was wind and there was traffic outside. But as the sun started to go over behind, which gave us wonderful natural light on the stage, the trees at the end of the garden filled with birds that screeched and screeched and screeched, and you just could not hear the last. And we had to do 4 shows every day. I said, can we do the show a bit earlier? Afraid not. You know, the people have all, it's all on the application, on the invitations. So we'd say, how are you? And the birds would stop. You couldn't hear the last 20 minutes. And the other animal thing, this is now in Campo Grande, which is in the west of Brazil, and is very much cowboy country. I mean, men do walk around wearing cowboy hats, you know, in the streets. It's just wonderful. And we went to Campo Grande, just a normal Brazilian modern city. But they said, oh, we're very lucky. We were invited to go to a finca, to this lovely ranch, you know. I went, okay, right. Is there a theatre space? Oh, they've got this big community centre. It's wonderful. And it was a nice, large space. But it was right next to what can only be described as the largest duck farm in the world. There were thousands and thousands of ducks outside, which would not have been a problem, except that in our show, we have a little black thing, which we call the duck call. It went, wah, and we used it in the yes-no game. You know how to play the yes-no game. Where are you from? Spain. Spain? Yes. Wah, you see. Now, so on stage, with the back, and the door was open because it's so bloody hot, you know. And so these like thousands and thousands of ducks were wonderfully passing by, just happily passing the evening together. And suddenly from inside they say, where are you from? From Brazil. From Brazil? Yes. And they all set off. Thousands and thousands of ducks made a noise. And it was one of the best shows I've ever been in, because the audience, as soon as the duck started the first time, I thought, that's funny. But the second time, people were on the floor with laughter. People were not listening anymore. People were just literally, stop, please. I'm aching so much from laughing at this, you know. So that's one of my favorite moments.
And that brings us to our final question.
Right.
If you're still with us, I hope you'll agree that this has been a fascinating program. It's gone on a bit longer than we thought, yeah, but so many interesting stories to listen to. The actual Any Questions program is in its 73rd year now. And it continues. The final question is always a short question, yeah, about something simple, and we thought it'd be nice. This is Maya Sedmak's question from Ljubljana. If everyone could just give us one tip to help with our teaching, and it's Didi to go first. Yeah.
I promise I'll keep it short. My key tip is an expression I coined many years ago, and it's what I call MAF for its anachronism, which is motivate, activate, and facilitate. Motivate your students. Love what you're doing through your own motivation and what you're doing. So you motivate your students, and then you activate their knowledge, what they actually know, in English and in their own language. so that you're including them. And this is where Jill's Classroom Dynamics comes in, with the wonderful activities that she has throughout that bring all of this into the classroom. So you activate what they know, and then you facilitate. So you activate it so the language is there. It enables you to find out what language they do know. And it also then enables you to find out what you need to teach. So you facilitate that and deal that with vocabulary or the language, the things that they need in order to go forward with whatever activity or whatever it is that you're going to use. So that is my key tip. And of course, there's a whole session to do with that, but it's motivate, activate, and facilitate. Wonderful for vocabulary, dealing with that and language, and really engaging in classroom dynamics, because you love what you're doing and they will love it too.
And with your three things, it's just reminding me of something that I often say, which is to, first of all, treat your students as people first, learners second, learners of English third, and maybe something might just get learned. Charlie.
Well, one word which Dee Dee has just used quite a lot, and it's one simple word, and that is love. I think at this stage in my career, I'm allowed to say that. I think, first of all, love yourself. And if you love yourself, you will love your work, because you've chosen to be a teacher. And if you don't love your work, it won't really work. So love yourself, love your work, and that love will actually communicate itself to your learners. And it can't be faked. And whatever your subject, just keep that in mind. Just a little anecdote. I left school 51 years ago now, and last year we were to have a grand school reunion. And I was delighted to eventually get in touch with my old school music teacher, who is now, he might be in his early 90s now. He was such a happy, enthusiastic, loving man. And he communicated this love of music with a passion. It was so nice to be able to talk to him by email. And I think the other person I want to mention is, of course, my very first kindergarten teacher. And I am still head over heels in love with her, that lovely Miss Barry. And I think if you can communicate that, whatever your subject, you'll be doing fine.
Jill?
Well, the first thing that sort of randomly occurred to me was, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt said, do one thing every day that scares you. I don't mean it as scarily as that. I don't mean it has to be something that scares you or that you have to do it every day, but just be open to something new and try something new from time to time in your teaching. Apart from that, I think the most important thing for me in teaching has been creativity. And I'm sure, you know, it's important for Ken and Dee Dee, and I know Charlie as well. Getting your students to create poems or little stories. You can do it at a very simple level, or drama. And I think creativity is tremendously empowering. I think it really develops your second language identity in a way that other activities don't do. And it's also a very joyful activity. It will increase your students' self-esteem, their sense of themselves, their identity. And it's just a very, very joyful thing to do in the classroom.
So it's 12:05 here in Budapest. It's 11:05 in London. In Auckland, it's what time is it?
Just past 10.
It's just past 10 in the evening. I'll leave it to you, Ken. You kicked it off with the fireworks at the beginning. And
I've just got one little point to make, without going too deeply into it. People watching this program will know who Scott Thornbury is, or they'll have heard of dogma teaching or teaching unplugged, which is a big thing and too much to take in at one point. But I think Scott, when he first started talking about dogma, he used the same story about he himself watching a class in Mexico City on a Monday morning, and it went something like this, that he came in with the teacher said, "This is Scott." Scott sat down and he said, "Good morning, everybody," and the class said, "Good morning, teacher." She said, did you have a nice weekend? And this class said, yes, we had a nice weekend. She said, Jorge, did you have a nice weekend? And Jorge said, yes, I had a very nice weekend. What did you do? He said, I got married. She said, really? Open your books at page 26. And that, in a nutshell, says everything about the good part of dogma teaching. Follow that trail. You know, your lesson plan is kind of important, but that's a trail to follow. You know, if your students are 14 years old, they won't say, I got married, but something happens sometimes. And the whole dogma idea came out of this, oh, let's just follow that. And Jorge talks about getting married and finds the things he can't say about what happened during the day. And he made a ¿cómo se dice en español? You know, and in English. And so then you find the words that he can't do. So out of his emerging thoughts come the things that you can teach them to help them with what they want to say. So that's what I leave you with. You know, good morning, Jorge. Did you have a nice weekend?
And I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, Dee Dee. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Ken, for giving of your time, you know, for our 30th anniversary. You mentioned, Ken, it was the 29 years, the English Teaching Theatre. Well, Sol has been going for 30 years. Well, Sol has been going for 30 years now, and we hope we'll survive after all of this. But you, superb. Thank you so much for contributing to this. Yeah.
Thank you for
coming. Take care, everybody. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I think we can, Ken, we can stop the recording now.